When I moved to Gainesville, Florida 12 years ago, I knew that I wanted to live in the historical district, but the bonus was I wanted to find a house within a few blocks from the library, the headquarters library. And we did. We are 2 blocks from the most beautiful library. It's got everything you might possibly want. It warms the homeless population and cools them in the summer. It has this gorgeous atrium that if I find it alone, without any other people in it, I will sit there and watch the stained glass as the sun goes across the sky and see as it reflects on the walls. It's just one of my favorite places, and it's a cathedral of democracy in a lot of ways because it's open to everyone. It gives information and knowledge to everyone. It is the place where everyone can make their lives better, and I believe in it so deeply. So my sons are 9 and 7, and the older one, Beckett, he's such a big reader, and he's always been a big reader. And a couple of years ago, I bought him A Wrinkle in Time, both the regular book and the graphic novel, and he's been loving the graphic novel. He reads it once a month or so. But now with the movie out, he's been reading the regular book too, and he loves it. And what I love the most about it, because this is also a book that was really foundational for my own life, but the main character is a girl. And it's so important for little boys to see that girls can be brave and strong and smart and heroes. The younger one is hilarious. He's deeply into the human body. So he's been reading a bunch of books about sex and reproduction, and some of them are really explicit, and he knows everything. I think the one to start with is probably Arcadia, because it is, on its surface, the simplest book. It's linear in time, and it is the one that is the closest to my heart in certain ways because I wrote it when my children were coming into the world, and it's in many ways about how the moral issues of bringing a kid into the world right now, and it's also in the point of view of a small child in the beginning who's a really good person. And I wouldn't say that about all of my characters. So I think that's the one to start with, is Arcadia. Oh, absolutely. Yes, yeah. Well, I don't go into my books or my short stories with any preconceived idea. Well, I have a couple of preconceived ideas, but I'm really open to them exploding and becoming something else. So a lot of times, as soon as you have a character that has become somewhat real to you, they will do something or say something that is shocking, or that actually, as the person ostensibly steering the book, you're like, don't do that because that ruins everything that I thought I knew about the book. But it's their book, it's not mine. So you gotta let it go, you gotta go with them. It's important, yes. It's incredibly important to hear your work in the air because the voice of the brain when you're reading is a very different voice than the voice when you're actually speaking. And when you speak, you will find a lot of the mistakes that you made, but you'll also find where it's almost like a stress test for the work itself. You'll see where the weaknesses are in a different way than you would just reading it on the page. It's essential, and I actually stole this idea from Charles Dickens, who used to put on hats in a mirror and make the voices of his characters, but he was a card anyway. Everyone was pretty fun to write eventually. I mean, at first I had a hard time getting into Lotto, the male character's point of view, because one of the original ideas of the book that actually clung to the book throughout all of its many manifestations was that I wanted to talk about privilege and about unearned privilege and about the kinds of privilege that we get when we are white, when we are born into a wealthy family, when we are born beautiful, when we are born male, right? All of these things that nobody really talks about, but that give you a real advantage in life. And my immediate knee-jerk reaction, in fact, is to not necessarily have a lot of sympathy for people like that from the beginning. So I actually had to work myself into sympathy for this character. Mathilde was incredibly fun to write because she is just burning on the inside and she's icy on the outside, and that split is really fun. It's always fun whenever someone has a secret or has a lot of secrets, and they're sort of boiling under the surface. Everything makes me mad. Yeah, unfortunately. Well, you know, we're in such an interesting moment historically, but also politically. And I wouldn't be telling the truth if I said that I actually don't go on Twitter and I don't check the news until lunchtime when I've been working for about 7 hours, because if I do it before then, my day is wrecked. First of all, that our children have to march to protest the fact that there are guns in their schools. I mean, how disgusting that people want to put more guns in our schools. So this alone, and I'm getting emotional, I have children, I was a child. Children should not feel unsafe in the places where they are. No child should feel unsafe. So among many other things, this is the thing that has been firing me up recently. And I hope these children, I bless their hearts, I hope they succeed. This is so bizarre. So I'm not a millennial, but this is the most millennial response I could possibly say. I was on Twitter and someone tweeted at me, "Wow, isn't this amazing about President Obama?" And I said, "Oh, well, it's, you know, people tweet weird things at you all the time." So I followed her link to the Entertainment Weekly article where he said it was his favorite book of the year. I threw my phone on the ground because I was like, oh my gosh, because you can't expect these things or hope for them, right? This is, also, he's the last president who's ever actually read a book. So I was really, really thrilled. I cried really hard, you know, like projectile tears. I called my husband, made him come home with a bottle of champagne. We drank it, and then he's like, "Can I go back to work?" You know, right? I said, "I guess, but I'm still really happy." And that, you know, in a few months later, President Obama sent me a beautiful handwritten note that I framed and I have on my wall, and it makes me really happy. This is an interesting question. Well, we women tend to be raised to be polite. And I do have a great deal of respect for the long history of people on the Charlie Rose Show and for his real commitment to art. When I was doing a lot of the research I did before I went on the show, because I didn't want to show up unprepared, I did notice a few things. I noticed that when female authors came on, there was a very marked difference between the questions that were asked of them versus the questions that were asked of the men. And the questions that were asked of the women were always based on, don't you feel excited or grateful or lucky, right, that you've come to this position? Whereas the men were always, it was just taken for granted that they had the talent or genius or whatever it was. And I wanted really badly to show up and say, Charlie, because he asked me the same exact question. He said, Charlie, I wanted to say, Charlie, did you know that through the 30 years you've been doing this, when women writers come on the show, this is the question that you ask them, and it's not fair. But I froze because I was taught to be polite. And I feel as though, even a year and a half later, I feel as though I failed feminists in that moment.